Hey guys, I wanted to talk to you today about bearing fruit and what that means. I wanted to ask you guys some questions about the passage I'm going to read, tell you guys some stuff that I learned while reading and thinking about this passage. The passage that I am going to read about is in John 15 verses 1 through 11. First, I'm going to read the passage for you, and then I'll start dissecting some verses that I thought were super cool or super important. So let's get to the Bible reading. So, chapter 15, starting in verse 1, says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers. And the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full." So that was John chapter 15, verses 1 through 11. And now I'm going to start talking about some of the verses. The first verse I want to talk about was verse 2. I wanted to sort of point out something that I think some people might wonder about, which is the fact that he said he's going to prune or cut back the branches that are already bearing fruit. Why would he cut back a branch that's already doing a good thing and that's bearing fruit? So this is where my job comes into help. I work at a plant farm or a plant nursery, and since I have been working there, I've learned how to prune back and cut back bushes, plants, flowers, and that actually really helps me understand what Jesus is talking about here. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about and what he's talking about. An example, hopefully you don't think it's lame. So imagine my finger is a plant, a branch. The knuckles could symbolize what's called nodes. That's where branches and leaves grow out of. So whenever you want to cut back the plant, you cut it at the node, and then that causes the plant to grow 2 more branches. And then you can do that more and more times. So you cut it again at the node, and it does 2 more branches. And by doing this a few times, you start creating a fuller plant, a plant with more branches, and therefore creating a plant that bears more fruit or produces more flowers. So that's what Jesus is talking about. Sometimes he might even put you through a painful process by cutting you back so that in the long run you're going to be bearing more fruit resembling Jesus Christ. So I thought that was a really cool analogy that he used. And then the next thing I wanted to point out is in verse 4. Jesus said that whenever he was pruning back the branches and he was tossing them to the side, that they would not be able to survive without him because he is the vine. Can you imagine a branch that was just cut off and thrown to the side or thrown in the burn pile? It's not going to last very long. It's going to either wither and die, or it's going to be burned up. We also have a burn pile at my job for the branches that we don't keep. So I don't want that to happen. And then in the next verse, in verses 6, he stresses the same thing again. He says, if anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. So, again, stressing the fact that sometimes he's going to cut certain branches off, and that's a really scary thing to realize, that if you don't bear fruit, you're not going to really be able to be used by God. And I don't want to be asked by Jesus one day, why did I have to cut you off? Why weren't you bearing fruit for me? You were supposed to be connected to the vine. Then the next one I wanted to talk about is sort of mainly in verse 7, but also throughout the whole scripture. I'll read 7 and verse 4 again says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. Verses 4 says, abide in me and I in you. And I just wanted to point out those two parts. First, it says, abide in me and then he abides in you. And in 7, it says, abide in me and my words abide in you. So I sort of wanted to point out that firstly, him using both of those things can refer to him, since back in John chapter 1 verses 1 is the very popular verse that says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So whenever he's using those two analogies, first he says that he will abide in you, and then he says that his word will abide in you. It can sort of be the same thing. But then he also goes on to say later that he wants his love to abide in us. So one thing I wanted to point out is I was wondering about what abide truly means. So I looked it up. Abide means to accept or act in accordance with. And I think that sort of changes things and puts a greater stress on things. Because firstly, it's asking, are you acting in accordance with him? And then he says in verse 7, are you acting in accordance with his words, what he's teaching? And then are you acting in accordance with his love, what he says in verse 9? So that definitely made me think a little bit. Am I acting in accordance with all these things that are, in essence, Jesus? Then the last verse I wanted to go over is verse 8. Verse 8 says, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. And by bearing fruit, we're bringing honor to God. Think about all the people out there who are acting like dead branches, using the title Christians, but not really bearing fruit. They're only bringing dishonor to the name of Christ. They're going to be cut off and thrown into the burn pile. And Jesus literally said in this verse that we have to prove to be my disciples. You have to bear the fruit. There needs to be evidence that we are connected to the vine, that we're connected to Jesus Christ. We can't just be lukewarm Christians, or we're going to be cut off and we're going to be tossed aside. So hopefully this helped you, encouraged you, put a few new thoughts in your head. And let me know what you thought. If you have anything that you want to discuss further, please put it in the comments. Thanks a lot, guys.